Hello, and welcome to episode 18 of our series entitled Unraveling the Revelation, a detailed look at the influences on the Church of God's interpretation of the book of Revelation. I'm Dale Rood. I invite you to send comments, questions, and criticism to me at respondingtoreligiousramblings@gmail.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel to receive updates when new material is available. Also, if you like this, be sure to share it with a friend so they can follow us as well. Now, one of the advantages of subscribing to this channel, it certainly is not for my benefit, but one of the things that you will get is that you will get a notification that something has been uploaded. You probably, for those of you that are following me, you probably know I haven't updated or uploaded an episode for a few days here. And that's because when we're working with these dates, it's been very difficult, very challenging to go back into the original sources and try to capture their thoughts in a logical manner so that I could present it in a more simplistic way. And so I've been spending a lot of time reading the original Seven Seal books and trying to capture that in a way that I can explain it. And so that's why it's taken a little bit more. But thankfully, this is the last segment on the timelines. We certainly do have more to share with you, but we won't be posting any more about the specific dates, as that's what this particular series has been about. So I'm thankful personally to have this over with. Here's our faithful little chart that we've been using that compares the sixth seal and the seventh seal timelines. The top being the sixth seal, or the evening light. This is the view that was held by Brother Warner and F.G. Smith. And then the seventh seal view, which divides the church age into 7 specific epochs of time, rather than 4, as we had seen above. And we've covered all of these dates now except for 1980. And that's what we're going to be covering in this episode. So let's look real quickly at the timeline dates. We've already talked about the 6 seal dates, which included AD 33, 270, 1530, and 1880. We've also now covered the 7 seal dates of 530, 1730, 1930, and to this episode we're going to cover 1980, which is believed to be the end of the 7 seal, beginning the end of the 7 seal, and also beginning the camp of the saints, which includes Christ's second coming. Now that was a lot to say, but we're going to break that all down for you. So let's jump right in. I'm going to try to speed this up as much as I can, but yet not go so fast that it becomes too complicated. So 1980 is the year we want to talk about. And we're going to answer the 5 questions that we've been answering with the previous dates. So we're going to, and if you recall, we talked about 1930. So now we've jumped ahead 50 years to 1980. And also, you're going to see in this particular episode something that's a little unusual. I'm going to introduce you to the teaching of the Camp of the Saints, which was believed to follow 1980. And so I'll be explaining that. Now, if you recall from episode 1, it was when I got to these dates, I'm talking about 1930, when I got to that date and I was trying to explain to my friend what Revelation was all about, this is where I began to have serious questions. And so, again, this episode here, and in fact, all of these series of episodes, is my personal journey. I'm not trying to persuade anybody to believe anything that I've said here. I want you to check all this out for yourself. And so my goal is not to try to convince you of 6 seals only, or the 6 seal message, or 7 seals. As I've shared before, I'm still on a journey, and I don't have quite clarity on some of these as well. So, and this was part of that uncertainty. I told you about, I graduated from high school in 1980, and I had no ambition of getting a job. I had no ambition of going to college. I had no ambition of getting married and having a family. I had no ambition of really anything much future in life, because I was persuaded that Jesus was going to come back in 1980. That was what was on our Revelation charts, and having come up under the teaching, I just assumed that what was being taught was true, and while I didn't fully understand it, I believed it. So it was this episode is a crucial one, and it was certainly crucial in my life. So now that I'm on this end, it's 2024 now, we have the advantage of looking back and seeing what happened here, and that's what we're going to try to do in this episode. Okay, so starting out, looking forward in prophecy. Again, there's that forward in prophecy. That's how prophecy is supposed to work. We should be looking forward and not backwards. What symbol or symbols of time is used to reach 1980 AD? Where do we find a span of 50 years believed to be prophesied in Scripture? And that span being from 1930 to 1980. Well, in the Old Testament, there is nothing like that. There's no symbol. There's nothing that we can use as types and shadows to get us to explain that 50-year span. It's simply not there. Now, Brother Warner and Brother Smith, even Brother Goodnight, they found the Old Testament, or they found the evening light time in the Old Testament. Evening light representing the Church of God Reformation, when it was talking about in the evening it shall be light. But even there's no reference to how long that evening light era was going to last. And certainly there is absolutely no reference or indication that it would be broken up into 2 epochs of time, each one lasting 50 years. And so we find nothing about this particular time span in the Old Testament. What about the New Testament? Well, the same thing's true. We find nothing about 50-year span in the symbols of Revelation or anywhere in the New Testament. Now, if you go back to episode 7, Brother Goodnight used the day symbol in Revelation 6 and 17, and then also in 16 and verses 1 through 7 of Revelation, and then finally in Revelation 18:8 to represent the evening time, and he assigned 100 prophetic years to the symbol because it talked about the day. Okay, further, he used Revelation 8, verse 12 through 13 to show that only 2/3 truth, more specifically justification and sanctification, had been restored during the Protestant era. And so there was this missing 1/3. And so he believed that the message of unity was restored during the evening light, and as such, the entire 3/3 light had then been restored. So he did use 100 years, and he did get that from the day symbol used in the Old Testament. But once again, we have no indication where that day or that 100 years was going to be divided up. So, how did Brother Goodnight get to 1980? Well, there's 2 ways he got there. The evening light was to last 1 day or 100 years. So he believed that the apostasy of the Church of God Reformation had taken place by 1930, which accounted for the first 50 years of the 100-year span of time described as being the evening light movement. So therefore he believed that according to Revelation 18 and 6, another 50 years was to be accomplished, representing the second year span, or from 1930 to 1980. So, as you know, Brother Goodnight began proclaiming the seven truth, or the seven seals, and blowing the seventh trumpet in around 1928. He published his first major book in 1933, and then, as we talked about last time, he sent out a little tract-like information to ministers and was sharing with them what he had viewed to be happening as far as timelines and stuff goes. And so by 1930 then, he was convinced that the Church of God movement had gone into apostasy, and since 1930 was 50 years away from 1880, that's how he came to 1930. And then he basically subtracted that 50 years from the 100 years of evening light, and that left an additional 50 years, which took him to 1980. That was one way he got to 1980. The second way was based on Revelation 18:6, and he believed that the Church of God ministry was to pour out 2 cups of judgment on Babylon, or false religion. So in the judgments given to her through the 6th seal ministry, or that ministry that was operating from 1880 to 1930, he believes she got her first cup of judgment, which lasted 50 years. And then the second cup was equal to the first, and so that would start in 1930 and then extend to 1980 for the additional 50 years. Okay, so a lot of information there. This is kind of how it looked like. So basically you have the evening light, types and shadow in Zechariah 14 and 1, which Brother Goodnight then assigned 100 years to. Now, Brother Warner, Brother F.G. Smith, those brethren in the 6th seal, they did not use that day symbol for anything, because they did not see where the evening light was going to be. Certainly would go into apostasy, and then there would be 2 segments of time. Okay, so where it says, "But it shall be one day, which shall be known to the Lord, that the evening time shall come to light," that one day right there, he said represented 100 years, and then it's broken down into the 2 segments of 50 years. And then at the bottom, I just put a little cartoon of the first cup of judgment being poured out on Babylon during the first 50 years, and then the second cup of judgment being born out on Babylon in the second 50 years. Okay, so there's a picture of what I just described in the previous slide. Okay. What Church of God writing do we first find 1980 AD, and who was the author? Okay, so the earliest mention we find of 1980 is in the Church of God writings, at least, was of Goodnight's book, his 1933 book, and it was titled Chart Explanation of the Revelation, with the opening of the 7th seal. So in chapter 6 of that book, he has a section titled The 7th Seal and the 7th Trumpet, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Vials of Plagues from 1930 to 1980. And so he says the 7th seal begins in 1930 and ends with figure 7 on the chart, or is open in its fullness at figure 7, AD 1980. And you can see I've kind of just highlighted a little bit on this chart. This is a chart that was in his book. It was more of a line diagram rather than a cartoon of the various characters and so forth. And you can see that he has the 7th seal starting in AD 30 and ending in, seventh seal starting in AD 1930 and ending in 1980. And then you can see beyond 1980, he has a little segment of time called the Camp of the Saints. And he's got the eighth beast listed there. So we're going to talk about that too. But this is the first reference that I've been able to find, and certainly by the first gentleman who was teaching this in his first book. So this is the first reference to 1980 that I believe you'll find in Church of God writings. So here's a blow up of that so we can see a little bit better. And then I put some little segments there. So I divided it up so you can see just at a very top level the various 7 church ages there, how he divided them up, followed by the Camp of the Saints. And so you see from 1880 to 1930, 50 years, and from 1930 to 1980, another 50 years, followed by this Camp of the Saints, which he referred to as an hour or 7 years. So I don't want to get into that right now. We're going to cover that at the end of this particular podcast. So I thought it'd be good to show you some examples of some of the early charts that also showed the date 1980 on it. I believe that this chart right here was the first 7 seal chart. And so you can see on the left-hand side the things that we kind of still carry on our charts today. And then starting with the various church ages and ending at 1980. Now, just for informational sake, I just want you to take a look at that beast there in the lower right-hand corner, the eighth beast. You can see how it's located, fully located, after 1980. And that's going to be important as we go on to onto our study and we start talking about the Camp of the Saints. Okay, but I believe this is the first chart, a copy of it. The photo was by Walter Madsen, and this was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was printed by Harry F. Cook. It's got his address there at 1601 North Frankfort, Tulsa, Oklahoma. If any of you are out there or know of anyone in that area that might have some more information about this chart, or maybe even copies of it, I'd like to know where the original chart's at. But I've not been able to locate it. But anyways, that's what I believe to be the first 7 seal chart. And so prominent there on the end is 1980. That's what caused me trouble in my younger days. Here's another one. So same thing, just a little more cleared up. Dates are still on there. You notice there's some dates across the bottom. We haven't talked about 364 or 606. Now on the first chart they also included 1281. It's not on this one here. I believe that was in reference to the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. But okay, now look at the end, 1980, and look at that beast there. Now it's kind of dangling a little bit before 1980, and the placement of these symbols in these church ages is very important because they're placed specific places so that they line up with the various church ages. So just right off, we notice that there was a shift that took place in the eighth beast of when it was expected to come into existence, versus here now it's shifted a little bit to the left into the seventh seal age. Someone said, "Are you sure that that's what they were trying to do?" I do believe so, and I'll share that with you as we go on. Here's a nice color one. So this one actually looks very close to this one here, but it's in color. This was a very widely produced and distributed chart especially back in the around my time, probably back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This is a pretty neat looking chart. It did have a little bit of an explanation, and you can see that there in the upper right hand corner. So explanation as to the dates. And since we're talking about 1980, it says on the key to the dates section, it's that 1980 was the end of the 100 years of preliminary judgment. Okay. And one final one. This is the, I believe this was the chart that was used at God's Acres in Newark, Ohio. We're going to talk about that in one of our future episodes. We're going to talk about the message that went out there and the key players and so forth. And so this was, I have found some old pictures. I think this was in my parents' pictures. I'm not 100% sure about that. But it shows the old barn, and this is where we went to every year. Went to God's Acres. That barn will be just packed with people, and there'll be people on the outside standing and listening in. It was a very exciting time. And they would preach on the book of Revelation. And the picture on the left-hand side at the upper part, I believe, is the chart that they used. Now, they didn't hang it outside, but they probably hung it up so that people could come and take a picture of it. I'll tell you that in the Seventh Seal movement, they love their charts. I did too. I was part of it. A lot of times, if I bring people in from out in the world, I would pull out the chart and show it to them. I was just an exciting thing. It was something that was unique to the Church of God, and so people look at it like, oh, okay. But anyways, so we were excited about the Revelation message. That's for sure. Okay, so let's talk about some events that were prophesied that were supposed to lead up to 1980. Using the scripture Revelation 16:13, where it says, "And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the prophet," the false prophet. So using this verse, Brother Goodnight stated in his 1933 book that prior to 1980, 3 frog-like spirits would be coming out of the mouth of the beast, and they were as follows. Number 1, the dragon powers of paganism working through communist Russia and their message of atheism. So that represented one of the frogs, the spirit of the frogs. The second and the third were the beastly spirits of, and I'm using his words here, the beastly spirits of pagan Rome or Catholicism and Protestant religious institutions. So in this case, he was talking about the institutions, the colleges, the universities, that were advocating for the teaching of evolution. I'm sure we all know that some of our leading colleges today were started by Catholic and Protestant churches. Harvard being one of those. Some of the more infamous colleges, they started out as a religious affiliated university or college. And so he was saying that the fact that they were teaching evolution now in these colleges was the second and third beastly spirits, one of them being Catholicism, coming from Catholicism or the Catholic universities, and one coming from Protestantism or the Protestant universities. So he also taught that these last 2 powers, Protestant and Catholicism, would unite and form a federation of churches. All this was supposed to happen before 1980. And so if you go back, to Goodnight's time, there was a lot of concern back in those days about atheism and Russia and communist. And that entered into his view of Revelation. The same thing with evolution. It was going hot and heavy and still being taught. I mean, communism is socialism. We've got that very much in play today in our own country. So he basically looked at the circumstances around him and folded that into his line of thought regarding what might happen in the future. the impact of what would happen. And so that was what he said was going to take place, including this federation of churches where the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches would unite. Okay? All that was supposed to happen before 1980. Next question is, what historical event was believed to be prophesied in the Old Testament or New Testament to happen in the year 1980? So certainly in the Old Testament, there's nothing there. There's no prophecy about 1980. In the New Testament, there's also no prophecy about 1980, in my judgment. And so let me just read here what Scripture does say. So first of all, the second coming of Christ was prophesied. We know that. That's all throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, and there are many instances of that. So if we just take 1980 to believe that was going to be the coming of Christ, then yes, all those prophecies would apply. But that's not what happened. So that leads us then to 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17, and as well as Matthew 24:36 through 45. We can read those passages, but even there's no specific date that's given. Jesus told his believers to watch therefore, for you know not the hour your Lord doth come. Further, even Jesus doesn't know when his second coming will be, for he said, but of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. That's in Mark 13:32. So we don't know. We do not know when Christ is coming back. That's why we should be ready for his return at all times. We don't know when he's coming back. And so it's kind of interesting because it says there, we don't know the day or the hour. Well, I don't think there's anybody predicting what day he's coming back and what hour he's coming back. But we clearly have predictions, and we're going to discuss that about what year he's coming back. And possibly even what month. Okay? So, there's at least two reasons why we should not predict the second coming of Christ. Number one, the Bible teaches not to do it, as no one knows when it'll happen. And number two, everyone who has predicted so far has been wrong. So we shouldn't be making predictions about the second coming of Christ. All right? Just an observation there. In what secular historical literature do we find the year 1980 listed as a major milestone in church history? Well, if we refer to 1980 as the second coming of Christ, there's been countless people and groups over the years who have predicted Christ's coming. And these are found in secular historical literature. We've already talked about the Seventh-day Adventists. They did. It was a big deal. Led to the great disappointment. Groups like Jehovah's Witness, they've made predictions like that. And there's been a lot of other people, not even religious bodies, but sometimes individuals have made predictions based on all kinds of things. And even in secular history, there's predictions about the end of time or the end of the world that's been made. So it's not a new concept, but today every one of them's been wrong. Now, in my review of what's out there, and you can do this for yourself, go to Google and type in 1980. What was significant about 1980? Did any of these groups, besides what we're talking about here, predict that Christ was going to come back in around 1980? Okay. None of them that I've found out, I really couldn't even find anything about 1980. But certainly none of them talked about 1980 being the end of the seven seal church age, or that it was to be preceded by a time of great tribulation, and that it was followed by the camp of the saints and Christ's imminent second coming. This is what Brother Goodnight taught, and it was very unique to him and the seven seal message. You won't find that anywhere else where it captures all those things in this particular prediction or prophecy. So here we are, it's 2020, and clearly 2024. It clearly did not happen. It was a failed prophecy. And it doesn't matter who prophesied it, it was a failed prophecy. And there's no disputing that. We shouldn't even be disagreeing on that. We're all still here. Christ did not come back in 1980. He did not come back in the following years right after 1980. So it was a failed prophecy. We'll talk more about that as we get there. So let's talk about the camp of the saints. So I remember as a small child, them talking about the camp of the saints. I didn't know what it was. I would ask my parents about it, and they weren't sure either. Because our Revelation charts had 1980 on it, and then had this little space afterwards, but it was hard to understand what was actually being taught. So what I've been able to do is go back into the resources and try to recreate what that teaching was back in the days. Nobody's teaching this now that I know of. I don't know of any Seven Seal church group or individuals that's teaching the camp of the saints. That went away. But it is included in these books here. And I recommend that you at least read the 1933 version of Brother Goodnight's book. This is the first one that was put out. So Brother Goodnight put it out. It was published in 1933 by Warner Press. And then there were individuals that came along and joined this cause, and they worked with Brother Goodnight to maybe expand and revise some of the original teachings. So the second book that I'm aware of is in 1936, and it's titled The Revelation with Gospel and Prophecy, including chart and connection. Now, Brother Goodnight was certainly the lead on this, but there's two new names here. Brother W Pendleton and S McAlister. This was published in 1936, and it was self-published. Okay, then 1945, it was the next version of this particular book, and it was titled The Revelation with Gospel and Prophecy, Past, Present, and Future. And in this case, it involved Brother Goodnight. He was the primary author there. And then also a man by the name of F Lawson, and then continued on with W Pendleton. Now, I believe this book was published in 1945. It doesn't say in there what year it was. So you have to read the book and try to find if there's any references to events that happened around that time. And then you just have to kind of figure out, okay, well, if this event happened 10 years ago, then 10 years ago is when they wrote this book. So it's either 1945 or possibly 1941. The next one was 1948, published in 1948, and the title of it was The Revelation with Gospel and Prophecy, same title. But it was revised. You can see at the bottom, it was revised. And this one was, again, Brother Goodnight, Brother Lawson, and Brother Pendleton. Okay, and then the last one. And this is the one that was most widely distributed. This was published in 1955, and it was also revised from the previous edition. Brother Goodnight had died in 1953, so he'd been gone for 2 years. So what they did was they took his writings and all the revisions, and they did a major update. This was a major update. And this one was put out by F Lawson, P.D. Turnbow, and D.W. Rogers in 1955. Now you notice Pendleton's gone. He's not part of this effort. And Goodnight's passed away. Pendleton was still alive, but he was not involved in this revision. And we're going to talk about these brethren here, their lives and who they were, starting in our, I believe, our next episode. So I'm going to tell you who was Pendleton, who was McAlister, who was Lawson and Turnbow and Rogers. Who were these guys? Okay, so these are the books there that are what I consider to be the original 7 Seal books. And as you can see, they were revised. So it wasn't just like God just, revealed everything to Brother Goodnight. He wrote everything down and then that was it, set in stone. No, the message of 7 Seal, and if you don't hear anything today, hear this. The message of 7 Seal has evolved over the years. It is not what's being taught today. Okay? And that's important to know that. A lot of times people will present something and leave the impression that it's been taught this way No, it was not taught this way. There have been revisions as time has gone on. Okay, so let me try to give you a brief synopsis in the next couple slides here of what Brother Goodnight taught. Okay, and this is why I'm encouraging you to get that first book, get a copy of it, and read it. You need to read it. It will surprise you at some of the things that was taught in that book. If you can't find a copy, contact me at my email address and I can email you a digital copy of this book. I want everyone who's watching these podcasts, I want you to read that book. So here's what he said. At the end of the 7th seal, at the end of the 7th seal, the door of mercy will be closed, and no one will be saved. Therefore, there's no rejoicing that's going to take place in heaven, because heaven, they rejoice over the salvation of one even. Angels rejoice and so forth. But because no one is being saved at the close of the 7th seal, there's no rejoicing. And this then is the beginning of the half hour of silence, and it takes place in God's heaven. Now, if you know anything about 7th seal, you know that's not what we teach. Every 7th seal movement that I'm aware of puts the half hour of silence at the beginning of the 7th seal. Brother Goodnight put it at the end of the 7th seal, and also he put it in part over in heaven. Now, not just in heaven, because the saints rejoice too when a sinner's come home. I mean, we used to sing the song, "There's joy in the camp, a sinner has come home," and we'd shout the aisles when someone got saved. But during this time, it was about a half hour silence, and it happened at the end. When was the end of the 7th seal? 1980. Okay, you see how this is all starting to come together here. Okay, he also said that the Russian communist Reds, also referred to as atheists, so them, Babylon, which was the Catholics and the Protestants who had formed this federation of churches, and also sect holiness movements, would unite into the 8th beast at the end of the 7th seal, and they would this would usher in the hour symbol. Now, during this hour symbol, starting in 1980, is a time of the greatest persecution the saints have ever received. I'm going to quote here. Such a time never has been, no, nor ever will be, ever shall be. This is the winter time, and except those days be shortened, there would be no flesh saved, no saints living or living in the flesh when Jesus comes after his bride. So let's break this down a little bit here. So he believed that the 8th beast consisted of 3 components. the communists with their teaching of atheism, Babylon, which was false churches, Protestant and Catholic Church, who had formed into this federation of churches, and then sect holiness movements. So these would have been the people that Brother Warner had been part of, but they had rejected the teaching of Seven Seal. So they really didn't consider themselves to be Protestants per se, because holiness, it was a holiness movement. It wasn't a denomination, it was a movement. And so it was the teaching of holiness. So for those people out there that were embraced the teaching of holiness, but they didn't accept the Seven Seal message, they didn't accept Warner's message, and then they didn't accept the Seven Seal message, they were going to all come together, unite into what was called then the Eighth Beast. And they would work together to bring a great persecution of the saints, like we've never seen before. Not during the Dark Ages, not during the days of Protestantism. This was something that went beyond that. And in fact, if God did not, if Jesus didn't come and that time be shortened, then they would have eventually killed every single one of the Christians. All of us. Okay, now did that happen? No, it did not happen. Didn't even close to happen. I tell you, I have some really good friends in the conservative holiness movement, and they have a convention every year. It's been going on for many, many, many years. It's called IHC, and I go to. I've gone to them. I haven't gone for a while. They recently moved it from Dayton, Ohio, close to my house. Now it's down in Tennessee. I'm telling you, the thoughts of those people, holiness-loving people. These are wonderful people. They're conservative holiness people. The thoughts that somehow they're going to join up with atheism and Babylon, and they're going to come after us Church of God people, and they're going to kill us. That's pretty far out there. That's pretty far out there. I'm trying to keep my opinions out of this. I really am, but it's hard to really hold back on some of this stuff, and I'm sorry about that. I don't really want to. I'm trying to keep this as unbiased as I can, but this did not happen. And I can't even see these holiness people who love us, we love them, all of a sudden going to try to find us. And that would be a real challenge these days, by the way. Seven Seal movement split up all over the place, split and resplit. You'd have a hard time even finding a Seven Seal Church of God congregation in most places. And most of them's right in the Midwest or, thereabouts. There are some on the West Coast, but there's entire states that don't even have a congregation of the Seven Seal. So somehow they would have tried to find us, and they would work with these other people to kill us. Okay, I'm just going to leave that right there. We're going to move on. During the siege on Jerusalem in AD 70, God shortened days for the elect's sake, lest none of them lived. Now that's a historical fact. In the end of time, so comparing, what happened back there, in the end of time, the elect are those who by their own choice have decided to be true at any cost. Because Jerusalem was a type of the church, God will likely shorten the final 7 years, which were to extend from 1980 to 1987, the hour symbol, and he would hasten his coming. So the thought was, and I'll tell you how we get to 1887 here in a minute. The thought was that just like what had happened in the destruction of Jerusalem, when God shortened the time and they were able to, some of the Christians were able to escape and get out, the same thing was going to happen here. We would be besieged by these three powers against us, and they would kill every single one of us if it wasn't for God intervening and shortening that time from those 7 years down to something shorter than that. That's what he's saying here. Okay, and then he said, the camp of the saints will be in a stopping or resting state for the church of God, waiting for the imminent return of Christ's second coming, while being spiritually surrounded by the forces of the eighth beast. So while these people are surrounding the church of God, we're sitting here in a state of rest, a state where we just stop everything that's going on, and we just wait on Christ's return. In the meantime, these people would be killing us and causing all kinds of persecution, such as never been experienced before. Okay, all right, we're going to move on. See, it's really hard for me to withhold my comments here, and I'm sorry about that. I think the reason why this strikes a nerve with me is because this is the stuff that I remember being taught when I was in high school, and this is the stuff that I thought was going to happen when I graduated from high school. And it didn't happen. And I didn't make any preparations for future plans because of this. I thought this was going to happen. Okay? It didn't happen. All right, let's move on. Comparing Matthew 24:37, where it states, "As in the days of Noah were, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. When Noah finished the ark, and all were safely in, God came and shut the door. And 7 days were fulfilled first, then the rain came." So from using the 1 day for a year time symbol, Brother Goodnight believed that once all the saved were gathered in the camp of the saints, that Christ would return within 7 years and the final judgment would take place. So basically what he was saying, because Scripture does say, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming. It does say that. So what he did was he said, okay, well, the animals went in to the ark. God shut the door. And then it was 7 days before the rain came and the destruction came. So he compared that to what was going to happen in 1980. Up until 1980, we were having this, the Federation of Churches was coming together. And then started in 1980, nobody would be saved after that. So the door of mercy was basically shut. And then we would be in this camp, and I don't think he didn't believe this to be like a literal camp. But we were in a state, so to speak, a condition. Where we would be there, and then 7 years later, Christ would return. Up until 7 years later, Christ would return. And then we would face final judgment. Now, that was the overall concept. He did not say, and we're going to break this down, he did not say Jesus was coming back in 1987. And he did not say Jesus was coming back in 1980. He was just giving a time frame of when Christ's return would be. So it wouldn't happen before 1980, and it wouldn't happen after 1987. Because you've got to have them 7 years there to make the comparison to Noah being in the ark and the rain starting. Okay, so finally using the 70 weeks of Daniel 9, particularly the last week when Christ was cut off in the midst of the 70th week, after serving 3.5 years in his ministry. So because Jerusalem was a type of the church, he applied Daniel 9 to this same time period, and he believed that the 3.5 years of Christ serving in his ministry compared to the 3.5 years of the camp of the saints, or that 1 hour that was supposed to end in 1987, And then he said that there was silence in heaven. It says in there's silence in heaven for about a half hour. He said, well, maybe what this means is that the door of mercy might be closed for half an hour before the appointed time for the end. This would put Christ coming at around 3.5 years after 1980. And he didn't say June 30th. I put that on there because that's the middle of 1983. That's how you get 3.5 years. So from 1980 to June the 30th of 1983, that's your 3.5 years where he was making the comparison there. But considering that the time would be shortened, though, it could happen any time before June the 30th of 1983. So if you just take those 7 years and you divide them in half, you end up with June the 30th of 1983. But he had said, no, we can't use that exactly because God promised to shorten the time. And so when he said he would shorten the time, that could impact his coming. Okay, now I'm going to put this all in picture form because I know it's probably hard to follow, and I'm doing my best to try to explain it, but it is complicated. Reading these. That's why I'm late in getting this episode in, because I try to make sense of all this and then be able to present it, and it's not easy to do. Okay, so then he went on to say, ministers who refuse seventh seal light and still contend for the sixth seal light, or these things that he's teaching here, the message, they're rejecting advanced light, and they are the fallen stars. And there would be about a third of the Church of God ministers who would fall. They would not accept it. Well, I can tell you, of the Church of God ministers, there wasn't a whole lot of them that accepted this. There was some. And they were those that were really, contesting the conditions within the Anderson Church of God. But it didn't even amount to 1/3 of them. It was a large number, don't get me wrong. We're going to talk about that in a future episode of what eventually happened here. Because this message in and of itself did not produce a coming out. It wasn't until later on that people came out, and they did not come out because of this message. They came out because of conditions. And some of those that came out then accepted this seven seal message. But the point being that if you didn't accept this, you're one of the falling stars. That's what Brother Goodnight taught. Okay, this is a huge reading, so I do apologize about this, but I'm going to go ahead and read it because I think it's worth having a discussion. This is a time when I would love to call upon a reader, but I don't have a reader here. So let me read this. This is actually in the 1955 version. So this line of thought that was being taught in 1933, it made its way all the way through the final 1955 version, which I believe is the last version that these brethren put out. So let me just read it. In Matthew 24:15, Jesus mentions the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, and the first reference given in the reference of my Bible is Daniel 9:27. This we have fully explained. Now there are two more references given, one in Daniel 11:31 and the other in Daniel 12:11. We are now living in the light of the open temple, the seventh seal. We are made to see things happening now and will continue on to the end of time. The king of the south and the king of the north are rivals, one against the other. They are striking for supremacy of power. The king of the south is the king of Babylon, the spirit of all false religions. The king of the north is the spirit of atheism that will crush all religions, even the true religion. The world today is divided into two forces, one for religion and the other against it. In the 11th chapter, the king of the north, atheism, was final victor. This is where Babylon the Great goes down to rise no more. She is recorded in Revelation chapter 18. As recorded in Revelation chapter 18. According to Revelation 18, 9 through 19, Babylon goes down before the return of Christ in the hour symbol. And then he quotes, "And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and live deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgments come." This is the time of that great tribulation spoken of by Jesus in Matthew 24:31, and was shortened to about half an hour, according to Revelation 8:1. This is also mentioned in Daniel 11:31 as the abomination. Quote, "And the power and the arms or power shall stand on his part, the king of the north, and shall pollute the sanctuary of strength by silencing its preaching, and take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." In sentencing the preaching of the gospel, they stop public worship. In this, it is said they, quote, "take away the daily sacrifice, and bring in the abomination that maketh desolate." Since the 11th chapter of Daniel is dealing with some things yet future, I will not at this time enter into the details. Okay, those are quotes from Brother Goodnight's book and his helpers there. I say Brother Goodnight, he was passed away in 1955, but these are the people that continued on with that message. Okay. Okay. So, now let's go on and read what he said about these particular days. So 1,290 and 1,335 literal days of the Great Tribulation. Okay, here's what they had to say. "This is a time of slaughter, both spiritually and literally, for people of all religions, including the true people of God. And we are made to hear God saying it is enough, as in the days of Noah, and closing out with final and eternal victory for his elect saints. We are not told what shall be at the end of the 1,290 days, but there is a blessing awaiting those that endure to the end of the 1,330 days. What would be a greater blessing than to be delivered from this the greatest tribulation that has ever been? This last period of time is about 3 years and 8 months, which would correspond to about half an hour of time shortened. Okay, so let me try to put this on a graph here. I know this is complicated, and I apologize about that. I don't know how else to present this. So what he was saying, and taking in consideration this last quote and the reference to the 1,260 days and the are the 1260 days, 1290 days, and the 1335 days. Let me try to show you what this means and how this all fits together. So I'll start on the left-hand side. Now you can find those days there listed back in Daniel. So that what he was doing, he was comparing, the events in Daniel that was taking place involving the 70 weeks and beyond that. He was taking that and trying to compare those to literal days in this hour symbol. Okay, so let's start at January the 1st, 1980. Now this is my date. This is not his. He did not say January 1st. He just said 1980. Daily sacrifice will be taken away. So in other words, what he was saying that this eighth beast power was going to encompass around the Church of God and even those Christians that might be in Babylon. He was saying that the time was coming when no one would be saved after 1980. The door of mercy was shut in 1980. No one would be saved after that. So he compared that to the daily sacrifice would be taken away. So he started it there. Okay, and he ended in 1987. How to get to 1987? It refers to the 1 hour symbol. That's equal to 2,520 literal days or 7 years. Where did the 7 years come from? That came from the likeness of Noah when he went into the ark, and then it started raining 7 days afterwards. A day for a year means that it's symbolically it's 7 years. So between 1980 and 1987, we're going to talk about what he was just referring to. So if you just take that time period, which is a total of 2,520 days, and you divide it up, you end up with 1,260 days, or 3.5 years. That takes you out to 1983. That's also a half hour of the hour symbol, and then the second half of that is the second half hour, or the 1,260 days, or the second 3.5 years. So that's all contingent upon on June 1983. That's exactly the middle of those 7 literal years. All right, so once we've established that, let's now go back and let's look at what he was saying with regard to the 1,290 days. Now the scripture, which I thought I actually had that scripture on here. I don't see that. Let me just back up here. Yeah, I don't see that. Wait. Oh, yeah, here it is, yeah. Where it's talking about 1,290 days in the Old Testament. There's a scripture that goes along with that. I don't know if I have that written down here. And if I don't, I apologize about that. So you can, if you take the 1,290 days, it calls those days out, but it doesn't say on there what was going to happen at the end of those days, except for the abomination would be set up. That's how it's worded. The abomination would be set up at the end of the 1,290 days. Well, that puts you out to July 30th of 1983. So basically about a month or so. It's 3 years, 7 months. That puts you out to about July of 1983. But he wasn't saying that Jesus was going to come back then. He was just saying some event's going to happen, and it's going to be the abomination that's set up. But all during that time, This is when the greatest tribulation has ever been. When all that stuff was happening, they were coming against the Church of God, surrounding us. They were killing us. They were killing each other. It was just a big mess. All this was going to be going on during this time. And then he mentions that the symbol that talked about 1,335 days, which is actually 3 years and 8.5 months. That would take us out to August the 15th of 1983. So we have this span here of from June to July, 1 month, and then we have these additional days, a half a month that takes us out to August the 15th of 1983. Okay, so all this time, this is when the Great Tribulation is happening, and all the events that we just read about was going to be happening to us. But then he then went back to the scripture that talked about whenever they surrounded Jerusalem in AD 70, and God shortened the time lest they all be killed. He then says that time would be shortened. The last 3.5 years would be shortened, and that it was a good possibility, since Jesus did not say that there would be an absolute 1/2 hour of silence. He said there was a silence for about half an hour. So he was taking that word "about" and saying we can't really divide it exactly in the middle, but we do have this reference of 1,395 days. That could possibly mean when Jesus is coming back. Because that half hour then would be shortened beyond that. God would have shortened that time, and then you only really have 1,185 days rather than the 1,260 days. So anyways, this is what Brother Goodnight and his friends were teaching. They tried to lay this out, and I'm telling you, I know I probably did a horrible job of trying to explain this, but it's difficult to follow for myself to just break this down. I've got it in my mind, and that's why I tried to put this picture out here. So bottom line, what he was saying was, first of all, Jesus is going to come back between 1980 and 1987, but we don't know when. But if we assume it's about a half hour, then with no other filters put on it, it would be about before, on or before June the 30th, or the middle of this time period of 1983. He said, but we can't really go by that because we've got these other filters on it. And the filters, one of them being God was going to shorten the time. So we can't really use that date there. But we can say that it's going to happen somewhere around that time. And then he ties in these two day symbols of 1,290 and 1,335 days. And he extends that to somewhere around 1983 in August, the middle of August or so. So, he makes it very clear that Jesus was coming back. He was coming back sometime around this overall time period. We don't know exactly when he's coming back. He didn't say he's coming back August the 15th, but he would say these dates apply. It would be about this time. So basically what he was estimating was that Jesus was going to come back somewhere at the middle part of this hour symbol, or these 7 years. So I said a lot just to say that. Okay, so Revelation of Jesus Christ, the true foundation. Let me just read Revelation, the first chapter, verse 1. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel by his angel to his servant John. And then in verse number 11, no other foundation can man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, and stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it was. Okay, so here's what I'm trying to say here. It doesn't matter if we use 1980, which is what was on the charts. It doesn't matter if we use 1987, or we use those two or 2.5 months in between, when Jesus was predicted to come back. The fact is, he didn't come back. He did not come back. This is 2024. So when we build upon a foundation that's including these other things besides just the foundation of that Christ has laid for us, when we build on that foundation and we've got all this other stuff mixed in with it, it's bound to show itself when the testing is coming, when the fire is coming on it. It's going to burn up those things that's not true, and what's going to be left is whether it's there, whether it's right, or whether it's not. So every man's work of what sort it is. We don't have to be in dispute or have questions about the fact that this interpretation of this particular time was wrong. It was wrong. Is 1980 a significant year in church history? No, it's not. It came and went without any significance whatsoever. The only thing that I can even think of that was related to communism was President Reagan was elected in 1980, and it was through his efforts and his leadership that communism suffered a big blow. I mean, the wall came down between East and West Germany, and Russia, their economy and their system collapsed. In fact, they had a big breakup of the former Soviet Union. And so it was, if anything, communists took a blow during 1980 and during that time afterwards. So, there's nothing there. It's not right. Shortly afterwards, Church of God ministers took 1980 off the Revelation charts, and they stopped preaching about the camp of the saints. I haven't heard anything about the camp of the saints since right after this happened. So I just showed you some charts. It was on most of the charts back in those days. It was on Goodnight's chart, and it got carried over. But it just kind of got glossed over, and the next thing you know, all the new Revelation charts didn't have 1980 on it anymore. And this is the sad part. I don't recall any of them ministers that was preaching that stuff. I don't recall any of them issuing an apology or even giving any kind of explanation. It just got swept under the carpet. Nobody talked about it anymore. In fact, it just like disappeared. Well, that's not, at least the, Miller, we talked about, the Adventist guy. At least he issued an apology. He's like, I got it wrong. I got it wrong. I do believe God's going to come back soon, but I got it wrong. But in the Church of God, no one that I know of, and you all correct me if you know of anybody, no one got and explained what happened. It just disappeared off the charts, and it went into silence. Okay. All right. So we're just about done here. I'm glad we're just about done, because I really don't enjoy this. This is the stuff I don't really enjoy. I don't like pointing out these shortcomings. This is Church of God's in my DNA. I'm Church of God all the way through. I don't like to talk about this stuff. You know, I don't like to talk about the dates that's not right and all that. I don't like that. And I'm not casting off on any of those brethren. I love those brethren. I told you, I've got pictures of them in my house. And so that's not the intent. But we have to be truthful. We have to be honest and upfront and truthful. All right? Well, I'm going to stop there because I could really go off on a tangent and I don't want to. So let me just talk about the summary. Since we're closing out these segments here of the timelines, let me just talk about a summary here. I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning. Isn't this what one would expect to see in prophecy? Events being foretold in a forward direction? If we're not looking forward in prophecy, then all we're really doing is giving a history lesson. Revelation wasn't given as a history book. It was given to warn people of what was going to happen in the future. What was happening then and what was going to happen. So we would expect our chart here with these dates on here, I would expect there to be, we could start at the left-hand side and have some kind of symbol to get us to 270, have some kind of symbol to get us to 530, a symbol to get us to 1530, a symbol or timeline getting us to 1730, 1880, 1930, 1980, and so forth. Now, we've already shown the camp of the saints. That's gone. But there is a message here. There is a message here. And you would hope to see something like this. You know, not the dates there in the dates aren't in the Revelation. These are all symbols. You would hope there would be some kind of time symbol that looks forward for each one of these church ages or eras. But instead, this is what we see. It's very obvious to me, and again, this is my journey. I'm not telling you to accept this. Based on my research, my studies, this is what I've concluded. The starting point was 1880. That's where the whole thing got started. And from 1880, they backed up 3.5 days, or 350 years, to get us to 1930. What happened in 1930? 1930, that was the first Lutheran Creed. But what happened in 1917 was more significant historically and globally, and that was when Luther nailed the 95 Thesis on the door of Wittenberg. So I'm not even sure 1530 is the right day there. But we didn't arrive at 1530 from the left-hand side of the chart. We arrived it because we subtracted 350 days, or 3.5 days or 350 years from 1880. That's how we got to 1530. And then from 1530, Warner told us how we got to 270. He said counting back. So we counted back 1,260 days, a day for a year, 1,260 years, and we come with 270. And then we go to the history books and we try to find something in 270 that would help justify that date. We found about some monks that were out in the desert over in the Middle East. And that's when the monastery was supposed to have started. But really, when you look into that, there were desert people, hundreds of thousands of desert people that lived in those caves out in the wilderness that weren't even religious. And you know, there's a story there as well. You can do the research yourself. That was one thing they came up with. That was an F.G. Smith thing. And then there was the discussion about St. Nicholas and St. Valentine. So we dug into this and we tried to find a reference somewhere to some event. We even found another one that said 200 years after Constantine's time, the Roman Empire had fallen. And so we went and we tried to find something to match that 270. Why? Because we started with 1880, and to back up 350 years take us to 1530. To back up 1,260 years takes us to 270. And so we tried to find something, and we haven't found anything of any significance that happened in 270. The truth is, from my judgment, it's a backdated date. Okay. Now, how did we get from 270 to 33? We didn't. That X right there, those orange X's, Church of God people that are involved in this prophecy type of thing, none of them are using any kind of symbol for those time spans that I've got the X's on there. None of them are saying that there's a time symbol that gets us from 270 to 33 or vice versa. The same thing with 270 to 530. It's not there. They don't even attempt to try to explain that with a time symbol. Why? Because these are dates that are backdated. Okay, so then let's drop down real quick to the seventh seal there at the bottom. How do we get from 1880 to 1730? We found a symbol that talked about 5 months or 150 years, and we subtracted it from 1880 and got us to 1730. It wasn't that we arrived at 1730 from 33 all the way to the right, going to the right. We started at the left-hand side and we backdated. And at 1730 we came up with this date because it's 150 years and it represented sanctification. But we found out that Wesley wasn't even saved. By his own confession, he wasn't even saved in 1930. He wouldn't be saved until sometime after that. And he definitely wasn't talking about sanctification in 1930. And furthermore, his understanding of sanctification doesn't even line up with what most Church of God people believe. He didn't even teach sanctification like we teach it. I'm saying I'm speaking generally here. Okay, well, how do we get to, what about that gap between 1530 and 1730? That's 200 years. Where do we find a symbol that talks about 200 years? It's not there. We don't even try to find a symbol. All right? So let's go back to 1880 and let's start going into the forward direction. So now we are going to go forward. All right, that's good. So what do? We take 1880 and we use the day symbol that describes the evening light time. We ascribe 100 years to it, and we say that takes us out to 1980. Okay? So that's how we got our 100 years. No indications anywhere in the Old Testament or reference to evening light that it's going to be broken up into two time periods. So how do we get 1930? Is it because there's a 50-year span somewhere in a symbol? No. How do we get to 1930? We got to 1930 because that's when Brother Goodnight sent out his book and felt like at that point the compromise of the apostasy had taken place within the Reformation, Church of God Reformation. And how do we get to 1980? Well, we know it's supposed to be 100 years, so we still have another 50 years, and so we put the 50 years between 1930 and 1980, and that's how we got to 1980. And then we came up with this Camp of the Saints, which I just put a big X on that, red X, because that obviously is not wrong. It's not right, obviously. Okay, wow, that's a mouthful. I really don't like to talk about this stuff. I don't like to, to present this and open all these questions up in people's minds. That's not what my intent is. But the facts are the facts. This is what got me thinking many years ago and trying to figure this out. I'm still on this journey. So anyways, I'll make a couple other points. You see I've got asterisks up there. I've got an asterisk in the span of between 270 and 530. Why do I have it there? Because they used, this is Brother Goodnight, used the 10 days that's mentioned in the Smyrna church, the church of Smyrna, the 10 days of tribulation. He took that time symbol that was in the second church age and he applied it to the third church age. So that's how we got 530. We subtracted that from 1530. That's how we got our 1,000 years. And now we have a 1,000-year time span on our chart that we can fit Revelation 20 into. Okay, but what was wrong? Well, he I don't know why he did that, but he picked the wrong church age, a symbol that's in a different church age, and applied it to another church age. If we're going to do that, we might as well throw the whole thing away, because at that point nothing makes sense. If you can pick symbols and apply them wherever you want to, the whole thing falls apart. And then the other asterisk I have is a double asterisk at 1880. If you remember from early on in our podcast, Brother Warner was looking at the 2300 day years there in Daniel 8:14, and he used the wrong start date. He used the wrong commandment, and also because it didn't get you to 1880, he added an extra 45 years in there so that it would arrive to 1880. Now that was rejected by Regal, who's finished up his book, as well as others. Today, no one that I know of, no one tries to take those 10 days, or those 2,300 days, and make them literal days that will lead us to 1880. I don't know of anybody that does that. Maybe there are some out there, but if they do, they would have to explain why the wrong starting point was chosen and why the additional 45 years were added. Okay, let's move on. So let's just real quickly, and I'm almost done here, a time of earthquakes. I told you early on I wanted to just casually mention something about earthquakes. So literally, an earthquake is a time when things are shaken up, right? Things are rearranged, left in shambles. An earthquake symbol is believed to be a time when the Spirit of God is turned loose and pours out afresh and shakes the earth or people. Earth representing people. It is a time believed to represent the mighty power of God. Now we read about 5 earthquakes, references to earthquakes, in the book of Revelation. And for those who may not be able to see the screen here, Revelation 6:12, Revelation 11:13, Revelation 8:5, Revelation 11:19, and Revelation 16:18. Now there's always been question about whether those are referring to spiritual earthquakes or political events, earthquakes, or both. In F.G. Smith's writings, he referred to the first earthquake as more in a political sense, in that pagan Rome was being shaken and shaken and left in shambles due to the preaching of the gospel. So he believed that the earthquake referred there was something that happened on the day of Pentecost and then resulted in God's people, through the power of the gospel and the anointing of the Spirit, being able to overcome the biggest enemy at that time, which was pagan Rome. But today, we don't really look at the 2 next earthquakes, not necessarily as a political thing, but more of a spiritual earthquake. So basically, we've come to accept what F.G. Smith said about the first earthquake being in the morning time, or that the time of which we read in the book of Acts. Okay, the second earthquake is believed to have been as a result of the sixth seal, or the evening light movement, which lasted from 1880 to 1930. And certainly we would probably put the earthquake as happening earlier in that time span rather than later. Because if it's true that the Anderson movement apostatized and all that by 1930, then I don't think that would be part of an earthquake. So typically they put that in the earlier years of the evening light movement. Okay, but there's the third earthquake that we refer to. And it is believed to be the seventh seal earthquake starting in the time period of 1930 and ending somewhere within the second coming, before the second coming of Christ. Obviously, it has to happen before Jesus comes back. So somewhere in between those years. Okay, so that being said, this is kind of pictorially what I just talked about there. You can see the first earthquake taking place on the left-hand side of that time period, or during that first church age. And then there was the Great Reformation of 1517. There was the Great Awakening, the first Great Awakening that happened in the 1730s. There was the second Great Awakening that happened in the 1790s. And then we have the second earthquake there starting in around 1880 and around that time period. But my question then is, where's this third earthquake? So we believe it has to happen after 1930, but will happen before Christ comes back. When did that happen? Where is it? Has it even happened? I know some of these church groups, and it's really pathetic, actually. In my view, I go with my opinion again, but it's really pathetic. There's some of these church groups, they'll have 10, 15 congregations, and somehow they think that the formation of them from the previous split that they had was a time of earthquake. And that was a great earthquake, such as never we see. This third one's supposed to be a big one. Something different about it. It says, such as we've never seen before. None of the other earthquakes are supposed to be like as great as this one. Well, there's no way. There's no way that an earthquake happened when some church group split and started a new group and got some revelation of something, whether it be a woman in the wilderness or not in the wilderness, or a necktie or whatever. These things don't equate to an earthquake. Okay? So I'm just putting that out there just for consideration. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I've heard other people's thoughts. I've not found anything that's satisfactory. Some even have said, well, the earthquake happened in the 1960s when the message of Seventh Seal came back alive. It died down, and we'll talk about that in our next episode. But it came back into light. Well, even that, that's something that's kind of westernized. It's something that happened here in the Midwest part of the country, and there were ripples, that went out to other places. But on a magnitude wise, it doesn't even come close to what we read about in that first earthquake, for sure. And even comparing those earthquakes to the Great Reformation, that was earth-shattering. Or the Great Awakening. History books are full of how God was moving back in those days. And even the Second Great Awakening. I mean, these were great events too. But we've not seen anything of that magnitude in the second earthquake, or certainly not the third. So I just put that out there, just for some consideration. Maybe to give you something to think about. All right, my closing comments here. This is my next to the last chart. So let me give you my closing comments. So this is from my perspective. Deuteronomy 18:22 says, when a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken, but the prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Or in other words, spoke it in some kind of proud or without proper authorization. Okay? That's what it means to speak presumptuously. So if somebody proclaims something and they say something's going to come to pass, and it doesn't come to pass, then that prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Let us not be so sectarian as to excuse and justify our guys when they set dates and their prophecies fail, and then turn around and quickly condemn the other guys when they do the same thing. We need to be consistent. Shakespeare said, "O consistency, thou art a jewel." If we're going to make excuses or justify our guys because we like them, and we do, we love them. We believe they're great men of God. If we're going to make excuses for them and justify, then we have to do that for the other ones. Or if we're going to condemn the other guys for what they did, not the individuals, but for the prophecies that failed, and judge them, then we have to do that for our own guys. Okay, so when a prophecy is made and then fails, it was not inspired by God, no matter the sincerity or the outstanding character of the person who made the prophecy. It simply was not inspired by God if it did not happen. Now, good people make mistakes. It happens. All of us have made mistakes. It doesn't mean that these people are false prophets. It doesn't mean that they're bad people or they were intentionally trying to mislead. I think some of these people just got ahead in their zeal and misinterpreted some of these symbols, our timeline symbols. So we should be very careful about adding to or taking away or in any way distorting the message of the book of Revelation. Why? Because this book was given by Christ himself. He is the author. And this book, according to the beginning of Revelation, it's supposed to portray a picture of Christ. And so if we're taking these dates and these symbols and we're making them into something that is not true, then we could be bringing harm to the actual gospel. We could make Christ, put Christ in a negative way, portray him in a negative way, because this is all about him. The church is the body of Christ. And if we're making predictions about these things and they don't happen, we should be very careful about that. We find that in Revelation, the 22nd chapter, verse number 18 and 19, and Revelation, the 1st chapter. I'll put this back up here. I know I said a lot. I know I have said a lot. And as I said, this was a section of the whole thing that I have not enjoyed. The rest of it I enjoyed. I don't like it. I don't like it because I just really don't want to put people in a negative light. And I'm not trying to, again, belittle people, talk down about people, bring their salvation into question. Nothing like that. But we do have to be honest, and we have to take an honest look. Now, I know people today, I'm starting to see this, there are some people that's starting to preach Revelation without all these dates associated with it. Because it's a historical fact that there was a New Testament church, and it was a powerful church. It's a historical fact that that church went into apostasy. It's a historical fact that Roman Catholicism developed out of that apostasy. It's a historical fact that Protestantism came up from the minds of men, and all the sects developed. We know that. That's a historical fact. It's a fact that there was a Church of God Reformation movement that was used by God, as well as others, but they were used by God. Those are all factual. So you can still preach the church historic interpretation from Revelation without damaging that message by pointing to these specific dates. Okay? I'm just putting that out there. There are people that are doing that. I'm seeing that more often now. And I see other people that are preaching, and I came up in an environment similar to that after all that other stuff happened with the Camp of the Saints. Then they started saying, well, it's about 270, about 530, about 1530. Okay, so people would say that, and it would leave a little bit of wiggle room, so to speak, right? But we don't say about when we talk about Christ coming, or Christ coming to earth and starting his earthly ministry. We don't say about there. We know that happened. And generally, they don't say about 1880 because that's the formation of our movement. That's the year. That is the year that D.S. Warner wrote his book. So I don't hear people saying too much about when they use that date. And then 1930, yes, I've heard people say about 1930. Why? Because again, how do you pick a year for an apostasy or a compromise or whatever we want to say about that date or that time period? So there are people that are teaching this without the insistence on these exact years. Okay. All right. Well, that's all I have to share. I'm sorry if I have sounded in this presentation as though I'm kind of weary in spirit. I am weary in spirit. Trying to put this together has been very difficult, and I apologize about that if I sound weary. I am weary. So I'll be glad to be done with this section. It's done now. We're moving on. And I want to talk now about those brothers that was helping Brother Goodnight. We'll talk about them and who they were, those kind of things. So we're going to move on. We're going to close this chapter of the book. Here it's closed, done. We're moving on to the next episode. So thank you for your time. If you're still listening to this episode at this point, you really, I owe you one, as they say. Listening for this long to this particular subject, I really do appreciate it. I do appreciate it. And I know some of you are listening to these things. Some of you reached out to me. I've enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed the feedback, and so thank you for that. Anybody else, you have anything to say? There's my email address. Please send me an email. I do not put my phone number on on social media. But I would be glad to email you my phone number if you'd rather talk. That'd be great. Just send me a little text and send me your number or however you want to do that. I'll give you a call. Be happy to talk to you about it. Okay? Lord bless you all. We'll see you later.